Good morning. It's 10 o'clock, so I think we should start. And if anybody who still want to join, they can join. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our participants around the world. Welcome to the 2024 Going Organic webinar series. I am Dil Tavaraja, professor in the Pulse Quality and Nutritional Breeding Program, Plant and Environment Sciences, Clemson University. Our Going Organic program is sponsored by NIFA OREI program and uh, the Good Food Institute, the Global uh, Food Shot, and the USDA ARS program. And today's our 2024 kickoff Going Organic webinar. This webinar series highlight the organic production system linking sustainability and the food security. We invite speakers worldwide to share their experience in organic plant breeding, nutrition, marketing, processing, and policy. Without further ado, today the speaker is a very well-known, globally recognized vegetable breeder, Dr. Michael Mazourek. Dr. Mazourek is the Calvin Kinney and Associate Professor at the School of Integrated Plant Sciences, Plant Breeding and Genetics section, and the Horticulture section. He obtained his doctorate from Cornell University in 2008. He released more than 50 distinct vegetable species. His interests are vegetable breeding, cucurbits, peppers, peas, and beans, biochemical genetics for flavor, human nutrition, and plant defense. And also he's an expert of quantitative genetics traits for especially for flavor and nutrition. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Mazourek, joining today. And without further ado, you can start.
Yep. Thank you, Dill, and thank you everyone for the chance to share some of our work with you here today. The title of this series actually inspired a lot of how I was going to think about what I wanted to share today. I remembered back the first time when my program made the decision to go organic. Part of it was we enjoyed the creative limitation. If we're going to be selecting for the vegetables of the future, we should create that environment that reflected what we thought we could be doing most sustainably for vegetable production, and then breed the plants to fit that environment. Another major factor that was going on as I had kids and wanted to bring them to see the work I was doing in vegetables. It was a challenge because with the pesticides that were used, it's known as not a good environment for kids. I shouldn't be bringing them to my fields. I then reflected on all the other undergraduates, other people's kids I was bringing to the fields, engaging in research, and we decided we wanted to make a shift, kind of for a combination of those reasons. And in doing so, I think I was doing what a lot of people do when they think about organic, is they think about it as the lack of something. You think about it as excluded methods, non-GMOs, or you think about it as prohibited substances. So no synthetic fertilizers, no synthetic pesticides. And while that's true and it's in the regulations, I think there's something that's often missing in kind of how we define ourselves if we're working in organic systems, not just about what we're not, but a chance to think about, well, what we are. And I've had a chance to look at this from a few different lenses. One, I think IFOAM, the international organic body, does a great job of summarizing the four principles: health, ecology, fairness, and care. And so thinking about this, it provides a good guide of not just what we shouldn't be doing or what we could be doing, right? Also reflecting, it was about 5 years ago this month, I was at an organicology conference working with Kiki Hubbard and talking about how we wanted to have a similar presentation about what organic should be for. We were referring back to as the 2016 at the time State of Organic Seed Project guidelines. just looking at what should organic seed do. So looking at long-term viability, genetic diversity, equitable exchange, sharing information, increasing benefits for the whole planet and people, serving public needs, the rights of farmers, social responsibility, and really started talking a lot about, what should organic be for. We weren't the only ones, but that is definitely great to have those conversations. And, so that was right in February, right before the pandemic. Caused us to be a lot of us to be home having conversations remotely. I had before this the opportunity to release this paper, a review about kind of what that agriculture future looks like. A great scientist, Lauren Brzezowski, the faculty at Kentucky, leading her own breeding program. And we had a lot of thoughts in this paper, where we just summarize and look at kind of what do we really think the sustainable system of the future should be. Um, we There were some things that we put in there that I thought might be a little controversial, looking at how can we have systems that support wise approaches and get away from the paid inputs to maintain yield approaches. I was surprised. It was more the most controversial part that I've heard from people is that we dare to blend organic and agroecology together. The experts in both fields will point out they're distinct. Um, but looking at them, we really want to focus on the overlap. And so looking at the principles, that are in the U.S. Standards as well, conserving diversity, promoting ecological balance, fostering the cycling of resources, and from from agroecology, this resilient polyculture notion. So how can we combine all these topics? And in the paper, we looked at it, from the breeding sense, where we are looking at there's what is going on if you're doing breeding for organic systems that's really going on in the rhizosphere. Is there some transgenerational, maybe epigenetic priming that the environment seed crops are raised in goes to impact their performance? How can you have the right volatile cues to deter pests, bring the right beneficial insects? Quantitative breeding, where it's not just going for a monoculture approach, inbred approach, diversity in a crop, diversity across the crops a farm is growing, and then, how is this really going to get integrated all into the grander farmscape? So we had this, and I had the opportunity, two great undergrads they were working with us, Ruby and Johanna, to start to look at, okay, so in our program, where we really employing these principles, where can we do better? Where can we do more consciously to do it? Right. I'm focusing a lot on diversity here. For those of you that might not know, the Southern corn leaf blight story is a great review article. To me, it's a story similar to looking as people are in some sci-fi movie exploring or some ancient archaeology, and you find this warning engraved on some wall not to enter. The the rest of the plot of that movie depends on how people react to that, right? So Southern corn leaf blight epidemic in the 70s was a disaster. 15% of the crop, 6 billion by 2015 standards. I can imagine currently. There's a favorable environment, so the disease mutated. 85% of the hybrids shared a lot of genetics, and horrible epidemic as a result, right? And here, serves as a warning to the seed production business to never purify the genetics of our crops to such an extent again, right? So you got to preserve genetic diversity. So are we doing that? How can organic be part of the solution to that? And it's being a time of great innovation in the field, right? So I think a lot of this for me, we've been doing a lot of analysis of market classes and genetic diversity within and between market classes. Here's a site that has some fantastic vegetable cookie cutters. Check them out. They're really detailed in how they can print these now. And in their catalog, they have lots of great cookie cutters. For peppers, they have two. They have a bell pepper and a chili pepper. And as most people look at peppers, this is sufficient for how we look at peppers. Like you can see the bell pepper, that one's not spicy, and that's often the difference. And so this, kind of cartoon approach to vegetables is market classes, and it's unfortunately how we look at a lot of our choices in vegetables. As a breeder of peppers, I can tell you, it's often spicy, not spicy. But the pepper on the right, that's not the bell pepper, tends to be earlier for short, chaotic seasons. It's more prolific, more productive, more flavorful, more nutritious, more naturally disease resistant. There's just so many constraints that go into that aesthetic, that cookie cutter shape of the bell pepper to deliver that aesthetic. So working for the market class at the expense of making real progress towards making a better product for consumers, right? The first decade of my career, I was working on trying to make butternut squash delicious, packed with flavor and nutrition, a convenient size for consumers, great chef input and how he had analyzed these phenotypes and the sensory aspects. And I think we made a lot of good progress, built on a lot of some great genetics that were already at Cornell, but we hit a plateau. Why do we hit a plateau? Well, as we've sequenced the whole USDA collection and many other cultivars of squash, you can see looking at the genetic structure of these populations, these neck squash and the moshatas, these are all the butternut squash. You can see they're very much related to each other. They share a lot of the same ancestry. Squash from Japan that are very kabocha squash-like are very different in kind of their genetic constitution. The simple cross between those created a fantastic squash. Robbins Kogi nut, there's look-alike cultivars out there now. It does everything I was trying to do within butternut, but does it better, right? But as it looks different, it needs some help getting out in the world, right? So working with advertising, a seed company championed it, got on billboards to advertise this brand new squash, and was featured by name in recipes. The Sweet Green salad chain featured it in a bowl, really got it out there, and the reception has been fantastic, right? So in this, market class is one of the reasons people stick with them is there's not much risk to releasing them. If we want to have the most innovative ideas, try to figure out how to get them out, from idea to actually used in the field, grown cultivars, to get them through the supply chain, there's a variety of pull-through marketing approaches, from the taste tests, farm-to-table cooking, participatory plant breeding, is breeder education and marketing all in one. There's a lot we can do in putting ourselves out there as breeders or as ag researchers in different ways, interacting with different groups, people from different disciplines, figuring out what can we do outside our discipline to help these new crops get adopted, right? If we want to have change, it's going to look different, and the public will not understand that at first. So we really have to do a lot of outreach, right? And it's a model we can replicate over and over. Your speaker next month, Lane Selman of the Culinary Breeding Network, has certainly helped me with this in the past. So we have this no heat pepper habanada, tastes fantastic, like a habanero can without the burn. Working with her, working with the Variety Showcase and the chefs, has really helped to introduce this to the world. And suddenly it went from a crop that was hardly out in the marketplace at all to it being referred to as an heirloom in some of the seed companies. So that was a fantastic example of what some marketing and understanding the audience, communicating, doing some real extension outreach can do if you want to get outside of those market class constraints. Right. So you can see one of the big things for me is market classes, thinking about the Southern cornleaf blight example. We want to have genetic diversity. Whenever we're breeding for that aesthetic of a market class, recovering type, we know it slows our breeding programs, it erodes genetic diversity. We can use that marketing to support diversity, and that accelerates innovation, right? So for any quantitative geneticists on the line, we know that to make a genetic gain, it's all intensity times accuracy times genetic diversity and how fast we can turn the generation times over. The more diversity you can have, the more gain that's possible, right? There's another principle, right? So there's some bit about genetic diversity, but about the ecological balance we can have. So I do a lot of work with peas. Mendel's aging is something that's usually restricted to intro biology texts. It's not something you see in the field. Plant breeders are taught to select against that purple flowered trait because that activates flavonoid metabolism throughout the pea plant and usually imparts some bitterness and astringency to the pods. To the seeds, it's seen as a negative. Um, we wondered, what can we do to correct that? Because the plants that have the purple flowered trait, not only can we breed them to be very flavonoid rich, potentially more nutritious, certainly more colorful, a way to make some crops stand out, be exciting for people to try new vegetables, sample vegetables, my kids among them. But also we know any plants that have these pea plants that have Mendel's aging purple flowers, it's activating flavonoid metabolism throughout the plant. These plants also tend to be much more fit. They are more resistant to abiotic and biotic stress. And thinking about what can be going on in the underground stage, one of the reasons we now know the wisdom of the three sisters approach works of growing legumes and maize side by side is that a maize plant is releasing flavonoid metabolites in the soil that's perceived by the neighboring legume beans, and then that increases their nodulation and nitrogen fixation. So there's above ground communication, there's also underground communication, and flavonoids are important there. Are they important in peas and how they work on ecology? Or is it just, we often complain about weeds in organic systems as we look to have our crops grow more like weeds? What are the natural traits that we've dispensed with during domestication that we might want to invite back into our breeding programs, but with some diplomacy, not a yes/no approach, but really molding them to fit our needs, working with all the modifiers, all the quantitative modifiers of these traits. So, thinking about the ecological balance, the ecology, the chemical ecology of what we're doing, I think is quite important to us, right? The other part we've spent a lot of time thinking about is shifting to resources that cycle in the environment. What are the things that degrade? They can be produced biologically and have a biological path to return to, hopefully, carbon dioxide, water, and ammonia. So, in conventional agriculture, it's much is managed through chemical applications. In organic agriculture, there's still a lot of inputs. They change form, and but they're still there. So how can we be choosy, selective for ones that are really the most sustainable, right? Because for my garden at home, we're growing with landscape fabric covering our 20 by 20 plot. So we have a plastic covering over the ground. It makes it very easy for us to grow. I can spend time there with my kids, exploring, having fun, picking, eating, playing, without doing as much of the maintenance. It's a great labor saver, right? And it works fine for me on our little 20 by 20 foot plot. We, for organic, that's plastics are increasingly used. Similarly, um, often they're being used to control some insect pests. There's some season extension aspects, but there's a lot of insect pests, particularly in cucurbits, where you have these striped cucumber beetles that are specialized pests that are very hard to control otherwise. So often the approach for many that are looking to grow squash organically, cucurbits organically, especially to scale up, is we really need to control the damage these insects do. They will devour the plants. They will transmit diseases. They lay their eggs at the base of the plant, and then their larvae will do a number on the roots of the plant. It's a real big challenge in organics and conventional agriculture. Um, these are controlled largely by neonicotinoid insecticides. The continued use of them is increasingly scrutinized. That tool might be at some point going away. There are some other natural insecticides that work. They tend to be pretty broad spectrum. We worry about the impact on beneficials as well, right? But the approach that is used in most commonly organic systems is, unfortunately, more plastic. Uh, in my garden at home, yeah, we use plastic. Um, we know it's not the best, but it's a crutch we can use for now. As we look at the future of organic and what's the environment we want to be selecting in, the growers, of course, have to use the tools at their disposal now and try to have the most environmentally friendly tools. And as a plant breeder, thinking about what's the future I'm breeding for. If we think about it, it takes cultivars a decade to get from idea to field. That can take, we have 10 years forward, maybe more. So let's start breeding for the future now. If we were to convert this form of agriculture, all agriculture, to using this amount of plastic, we would have problems, right? So it's a stopgap. Right? So as I started out breeding squash organic systems, this is how we controlled a lot of the insects. Um, to assuage our guilt, we partnered with some other organizations on campus, the Recycling Ag Plastics Group. They were phenomenal in how we could help maintain their balers and help spread the word about how plastic can be cleaned, which ones can be collected. And then it was collected, broke back down into the fuel oils it was created from. A lot of plastic can get pulled out of the fields if the price of petroleum is right. There's a lot of dirt that comes with it. You got to clean the plant. That comes as a cost. So these plastics can be recycled when the economics works out. Um, we were very proud of this and thought we were covering our bases until we increasingly were educated by visitors about the microplastic shedding, and how plastic is not just inert. Now looking at some of the recent reports on nanoplastic sheddings in the environment, the amount that's getting spread, there's little we can do that can say, okay, we can continue to use more and more plastic. We need to reduce it. So how to spin that into a positive. The genetic diversity is out there to really breed for crops that don't require as much plastic. So how can we reduce it? So we spent a while looking at rolled cover crops to see, can we breed for that very new environment of a later planting, cool soil, nitrogen trapped environment. We can look at, okay, how can we reduce the need for row cover for season extension, early starts to the season, by having much more short season vegetables. So we don't have the panic of a late frost in the spring or an early frost in the fall. We have also for insects, I think there's not as much breeding for insect resistance as I think we could really have in agriculture, especially organic agriculture. I think is the place to really make that a priority, and to be able to make some change. By working in organic systems, it forces our hand. So an example work we've been doing is looking at, the squash on the top has co-evolved with striped cucumber beetles. It was a subspecies domesticated in the southeastern U.S., where they don't have the luxury of the freezing winter. You have long cycles of weather that's conducive for insects to multiply. And the squash that originated there, this yellow crookneck squash on the top, is naturally resistant to striped cucumber beetles. Work done by, again, Lauren Brzezowski, and a lot of work in organics in our program, discovered that it looks like there's two mechanisms that this plant uses. There is a lack of an attractant, the cucurbitacin attractant in the cotyledons. There also seems to be some repellency to feeding in the true leaves of the plant. Contrast this to the subspecies on the bottom, the golden zucchini, or zucchini in general. It looks pretty similar in those photos. Consumers insist the zucchini on the bottom is more popular. Unfortunately, it's more popular to the beetles as well. And you can see a typical plot that is ravaged side by side with the one on top, where you see wilt and some of the diseases the insects transmit, and then also the total defoliation you'll get of unprotected plots. As I mentioned in the pepper example, so consumers will see, well, there's a difference. You have the straight neck summer squash and that zucchini on the bottom. The summer squash is not only more insect resistant, it is also much more higher yielding. In our trials we've done, it has double the yield. So you don't need to use plastic. It fruits earlier and you get twice as much. As the growers and people I've networked with in the southeastern U.S. have also illustrated to me, it tastes better. A lot of the cooked squash dishes are made with a crookneck summer squash, and some people tend to avoid that zucchini at the bottom when looking for flavor. So definitely work that can be done there is a breeding priority, right? And I think the last is less of a priority, but an approach. So much like the southern corn leaf blight example, for cucumbers, we had an epidemic, a pandemic emerged about 20 years ago. The resistance that was deployed across the globe, a couple genes were really robust until they weren't. The pathogen mutated, wiped out all cucumber production up and down the East Coast and all throughout the world in cucumber growing regions. It was a huge problem. There's some great efforts going on in some of the traditional approaches to find QTL, introgress those components of resistance into a background that kind of matches some of those commercial production market classes. In parallel, we had an effort. It's been very successful. The cultivars have been coming out in different iterations over the years that we've been doing the work. So instead of doing that typical backcross approach. Increasingly, we're doing this aided by genomic selection. This was just by phenotypic. We started doing recurrent selection to try to maximize the gain we were making, the stability of the gain, the diversity of the genetics we had in our program. So toward the end of the season, as the pathogen has done a lot of its damage, it's easy to, instead of rating every plant in the field, just to go and see out of thousands of plants instead of hundreds, where are the survivors that are fruiting well. We take cuttings, root them back in the greenhouse, so we can do controlled intermatings between those best of the best. So really to evolve those plants. We've had great success of this approach. One of our releases is featured there at the top, and so you can see a plot where the leaves are still growing, largely healthy, much healthier than the susceptible control at the bottom, and one of the resistant checks that was bred through a more conventional backcross introgression approach. So we think we're onto something for the stability of resistance, bringing back some of the recurrent selection, mass selection approaches in our research, and picking out the right combination of where should we integrate phenotypic recurrent selection with where can we introduce some DNA technology, genomic selection, et cetera, to be able to guide us much more efficiently in the field to get more generations of selection per year. The other benefit of this, of course, versus some of the other approaches, is hybrids in particular, is that as this variety, if it is dropped, if it's unavailable to the growers, to the public in the future, being an open pollinated variety, it's something where people can save the seeds and continue to grow it. It gives our resistances are not utility patented. All of the genetics I recognize I'm working on have been crosses done by others, selections others have made thousands of years ago, early on, or recently, just a couple generations or two ago in the faculty research programs here at Cornell, or that I'm getting seed from. So continuing that legacy with some diversity, I think, is critical and matches some of the ideals and the goals, especially from that State of Organic Seed guidelines from the Organic Seed Alliance a few years ago. Okay. So with that, I think I'll wrap up. Thank you all for your time today. A lot of people to acknowledge at Cornell, past and present, the chefs, the predecessors, all of the large grants teams that we work together on these projects, and all of the funders, especially USDA and federal formula funds that have supported our ability to do the lion's share of this work in cultivar development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was wonderful. It was really, really, really good. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. And I see in our participants, they're from different parts of the world, not only from South Carolina. There are many growers from the East Atlantic coast, but also we have people from Turkey, Italy, Spain, India. Like, it's just a vast range of people. So I'm going to ask a question, a global type of question, because you're a global man. Um, so organic is resource limited. For us in the US, it's basically USDA certified is our gold standard for our growers. But this is a little different for the international audience. So since the resources are getting limited, but the organic system is complex, what is your views on breeding vegetables for organic, how this can link to our food security, or what is your message to the international growers?
Yeah, I think for international, what do we all share looking at the southern hemisphere, you often see organic and agroecology blended together in ways that are different from how we've rigidly classified them uh, here in the northern hemisphere. Different ways we define and do policy here. Um, I think there's a lot of lessons that actually we can gain from looking at how people are managing this. From even from me in New York, it is wintry outside. We have a freeze, a reset. I spend a lot of time learning about the environment of the future from colleagues in the Southeast. Um, they are working on sustainable agriculture in a much more difficult system where we have short seasons. They have good conditions all year for the crops and for the pests. And so things can really build up. As we're looking at, longer growing seasons, milder winters, their challenges will become my challenges. So big thing is we can learn from a lot of people that are just having wise practices now.
Absolutely. That's
Yep.
that's a really good take-home message. And it doesn't, for America, yes, it had to be USDA certified organic. But for the other parts of the world, this is more like a sustainable technique. That's your
Yeah.
message.
Yeah,
It's
and I think it's looking at how resources go back. So I think it's one of the challenges how to fund it. And so I think everywhere and in whenever you, especially in conventional systems, it's based on selling products. And then selling those products has a return on investment for R&D and continued investment in those products. Where you just have a smart practice, like Three Sisters Agriculture, want to study that. So to learn how it works or celebrate it, all different aspects, it's hard to be able to get reinvestment that way. So I think that's a common strategy to build in sustainable systems globally.
absolutely. That's wonderful. And thank you for that answer because I know a lot of international people listening to this. So the next one, it is so interesting that to see that you are actually regenerating all these plastics into something else, which is really, really, really great because in our state, most of those vegetables were grown with the plastics, and I've seen that because I work with the growers. Um, so do you think this kind of technology can be adapted to the Atlantic region, like our state and up to Virginia to Florida?
Yes, and I think it depends on the whether it happens or not is unfortunately dependent on the price of crude oil. When petroleum is expensive, then people look at other sources and realize, oh, we can recycle this. And you see an uptick, you have to clean the dirt off, that makes it more expensive to do. It can still be done now, but unfortunately now since the price of petroleum is down, you see these plastics just returning to the landfills or out in the environment, unfortunately. So I think that's one of the messages there. We can be recycling a lot of ag plastics. How do we get incentives? And in this, I don't want to uh, put any of the issues really on the farmers. Farming is hard. The salt of the earth people, stewards of the land, they need help. So this is not through a tax on ag plastics, I would say, but it is a matter of how can we create and support recycling systems where we realize all of us eat. So this is all of our problems. How can we help support these solutions? Um,
Oh, that's there's a price question again. Can the plastic be stockpiled until the prices increase again?
um
Hard to answer that.
I think you just need the infrastructure, you need the economics of it to work out. For a lot of things, this do the economics work out. So you can stockpile. There's a lot of concern about where some of our recycling may or may not be going now. How can we do a better job sorting? For sure. So we can create the system. I'll mention it doesn't solve potentially the microplastic shedding. Row cover is a lot of very small fibers. Nanoplastics are now just a concern, leaching into water from water bottles, etc. So I think there's things we can do to mitigate things for sure. I think it's still, that principle of recycling inputs. So how can we have things that we know are really going to break down? There's biodegradable plastics, but are they really? I think there's a lot more work there. So how can we move to systems that we know we're just gonna be like ashes to ashes, sort of dust to dust?
I agree with you. Okay, now I want to move to your favorite subject, genetics, quantitative genetics. Uh, one of the questions about these flavor traits, and you and I work on similar kind of aspects. Uh, how so when you release a variety, how long this trait will be stayed there, and then when it start the genetic drifting?
Yeah, so that is a great question that we work with a lot. We have some current challenges that are showing up. In general, we breed until something is very stable. For a lot of my previous releases, pure lines, a lot of my crops don't have inbreeding depression, or we work to have genetic diversity, multiple selections, and really make sure we have stability. We do need to do a little bit more work to make sure stuff stays true to type. We do see some issues where some things drift or there's an outcross. A hybrid would kind of cover that up, in kind of how the seed is produced and just the nature of the heterozygosity. So there is a need to have good stock seed and foundation seed programs. I've been increasingly involved in helping sustain my cultivars out in the world. As you get a brand for something, it's recognized. It's really sad to see off types out there in it. And that can kind of be a detriment to everything you've tried to build. So it requires a lot more than they told me in grad schools in those textbooks about how to do plant breeding for sure. The IP as well.
Exactly. So yeah, so it's complicated because it can be drifted. It's stable for a while. We did a project with the Harvest Plus for iron and zinc. It's stable for 5 years. After that, it started drifting. So it was a lot of work other than the book. Since we talk about that, I want to move to the open source pollination, which is
Yep.
you and I always talk about and we fight about it. So
Yeah.
these varieties are mostly open pollinated, and
Mhm.
so that means the growers can save their seeds, right?
Yep.
So, what is your policy on your cultivar release? Like, is it all open, uh, uh, public, open to public release? Because we all get funded from the federal government, so our varieties are publicly available. So, I
Yeah.
just want to know your views on that.
Yeah, and so I think that's a philosophical one and definitely grounded in a lot of some of those principles I shared at the beginning. Um, So I we release all of our materials now without really any third party, carry on restrictions. So we will license our materials to seed companies. I think it's very important that if you have a business that is doing a for profit venture with something that was developed from public funds, that they reinvest in it. It's kind of like paying the fees you go into a state park or national park. It's kind of that little user fee for it. As people get my seeds, buy seeds from a seed company, it really doesn't come with a lot of restrictions, so they can breed, cross with it. That's compatible with a lot of the thoughts I think in the open source seed movements. I'm on the board of Aussie where we discuss that, look at the pledge, but we're having to look at, for me, looking at also where can we still shepherd materials? So when things go off the rails, when companies aren't wishing to contribute, even though they're having great success with your cultivars, is that really fair? So increasingly, we're looking at PVPs as a way that we have to publish how we bred it, deposit seed in the USDA for others in the future, and people can use it to do their own breeding work and continue to build off it. So I think that's a good balance. Haven't had as much luck with exclusivity. I think PVPs can be used as a tool for exclusivity. That's been always a challenge in how I relate to all my colleagues in the seed industry. I'm trying to help everybody. So that kind of the soft release where it's all publicly available, but we do need to really strongly encourage the for-profit entities to, you know, to continue to do their part to support this public community endeavor.
This is so wonderful, breathtaking conversation with you, and thank you so much for all this. And we have a lot of questions, but I know you have to run to teach your next class. And I'm really grateful to you coming today and we share your views on organic agriculture, because we all breeders, we need to help out our stakeholders. So having this is very, very important to have these webinars. And thank you so much for that. Our next speaker next week would be Lane Salmon. It is on February 14th. I'm going to advertise this on our avenues, and you all will get an email. And this is also very interesting. Lane, someone who worked with Michael and myself, and we all going to be like a team and going to do some great things out there for the nutrition and the consumer acceptance. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And we will hope to see you again next month. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.